The morning air was brisk at the Arlington Air Museum. Veterans from every division of the armed forces stood proudly along the marble steps, gathered to commemorate the grand reopening of the museum's tribute wing. Among them was 78-year-old retired Air Force pilot Ellie Carter. Dressed in her sharply pressed navy blue uniform adorned with shining medals, she stood tall, her presence commanding yet quiet. She hadn't come seeking recognition. Despite being one of the most decorated female pilots in U.S. history, President Donald Trump was set to deliver remarks at the event. Word had spread quickly he would personally greet and shake hands with selected veterans. The occasion was meant to symbolize gratitude and national unity. Yet while the crowd clapped enthusiastically, Ellie remained motionless, her attention fixed on a creased photograph held in her hand. Journalists noticed her stillness, sensing something out of the ordinary. Her face was calm but unreadable, her grip on the photo unyielding. When her name was called to step forward for the honorary handshake, cameras turned. Voices murmured. She didn't move. As President Trump made his way down the line, offering firm handshakes and warm greetings, he finally reached Ellie and extended his hand toward her. She didn't take it. Instead, she stepped back gently. Silence swept the space. Even Trump seemed momentarily stunned. Ellie raised her hand, not to shake, but to show him the worn photograph. "This is why," she said softly. Her tone was calm, but carried a weight that could not be missed. Trump looked down at the picture. His face grew serious. Around them, onlookers leaned in, their curiosity now tinged with concern. Who was in the photograph? What was it about this image that would cause a war hero to refuse the handshake of a sitting president? The photo showed 2 young Air Force pilots. One was unmistakably Ellie in her youth. Beside her was a young man with sandy hair, a smudge on his cheek, and a handwritten name on the back, Lieutenant Daniel Harris, 1983. Trump studied the photo, eyebrows furrowed. Who was he? He asked. Her voice was steady, but filled with emotion. He was my wingman, she said. The same man you called a traitor on national television 2 decades ago. The crowd gasped. Trump looked surprised. Daniel Harris? I don't recall, he stammered. You wouldn't, Ellie said firmly. But I do. He saved my life over the Persian Gulf. He risked everything to bring us home. Later, he defied an unlawful order, and instead of being honored for his integrity, he was court-martialed and labeled a coward. You mocked him during a campaign rally, turned his story into a punchline. Trump opened his mouth, caught between confusion and defensiveness, but no words came. The tension in the air was thick. Ellie lowered the photo, but didn't tuck it away. I didn't come here for attention, she added. But I won't shake the hand of a man who ridiculed a hero he never bothered to understand. Camera flashes erupted. The moment was instantly viral, but Ellie didn't care about going viral. She was there for Dan, the man who had sacrificed so much for her, and was erased from history. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Trump looked at her again. Tell me about him, he said at last. Ellie hadn't expected that. She hadn't anticipated the president would listen, especially not here, surrounded by reporters. But his voice lacked mockery and was unusually quiet. She took a breath. After we landed in '83, Dan was changed. He kept replaying the mission in his head. One of our commanders had ordered us to bomb a village we knew was filled with civilians. Dan refused. I stood by him, but he bore all the consequences. Trump blinked. He was discharged dishonorably. They stripped him of everything, Ellie said. His pension, his rank, his dignity, the media destroyed his reputation. And when you used him in that rally calling him a disgrace, you finished what the system started. She pulled a second paper from her jacket, a letter, crumpled with age. He wrote this before he died. He took his own life. Trump's expression grew solemn. Ellie held on to the letter. You talk about loyalty, but real loyalty means doing what's right, not just following orders. Dan was loyal to the people below, the innocent ones. She looked directly at him. That's the kind of hero I had the privilege of flying with. The silence stretched. Reporters stopped scribbling. Trump finally asked, "May I read it?" Ellie hesitated, then slowly handed him the letter. He hoped someone would understand one day, she whispered. Maybe that day is now. Trump unfolded the note. His eyes scanned the handwritten words. To anyone who still remembers me, I didn't betray my country. I defied an order that would have taken innocent lives. I acted on what I was taught to protect. I don't want medals. I just want truth to matter. Lieutenant Daniel Harris-Trump blinked. I remember the name now. The media twisted that story. I didn't know. Ellie looked up. You didn't ask. No one did. The mood shifted. It wasn't political anymore, it was human. Veterans in the crowd nodded, some wiping away tears. Trump folded the letter carefully. I owe you an apology. And to him as well. Ellie didn't respond. She didn't need to. Trump turned toward the audience. I want to share the real story, he said. Lieutenant Harris stood for what we say we believe in: courage, integrity, honor, even when it cost him everything. The room was silent, listening. Trump looked at Ellie. If you'll allow me, I want to honor him. Not as a politician, but as someone who has made mistakes. Ellie said nothing, but her eyes glistened. In moments, the entire ceremony changed. Trump asked for a special tribute to be prepared not for himself, but for Lieutenant Harris. Taking the podium again, he addressed the crowd. Today was meant to honor veterans, but we often overlook those history misjudged, he said. Holding up the letter, he continued, Daniel Harris refused an order that would have killed civilians. He did what we ask of our soldiers: protect the innocent, uphold our values. I once called him a disgrace. I was wrong. Ellie caught her breath. She had waited decades for someone to say that. I want his name remembered with dignity, Trump said. I want a plaque in this museum. His name, his story, his truth. Applause began softly, then built. A few saluted. Some wept. Ellie stood still, overwhelmed. She had come ready to be ignored, but now Daniel was being honored. A young Air Force cadet approached and handed her a small American flag. Ma'am, the cadet said, voice trembling, thank you for standing up for him and for all of us. Ellie finally smiled. Thank you for listening. She looked down at the photograph again. They see you now. Dan died after the ceremony. President Trump spoke to Ellie away from the cameras. I've said many things over the years, he confessed. But today reminded me that real heroes often go unnoticed. You can't change the past, Ellie replied, but you can stop repeating it. He looked down at Dan's letter again. I wish I had known. You could have asked, she said. No anger, just honesty. That was enough. Asterisk, he offered his hand again, this time not as a public figure, but as a man. Ellie paused, looked at Dan's photo, and shook his hand. Not for Trump. For Dan. Days later, the museum's director met with Ellie. I want to create something new, he said. The Hall of the Forgotten, dedicated to those erased or misunderstood. He wanted Daniel to be the first, but not the last. Ellie's voice broke. He would have loved that. They worked together on a new exhibit. Photos, letters, video clips, testimonies from veterans, including Ellie's story. More people submitted stories of forgotten heroes. The museum's inbox overflowed. A local reporter visited Ellie's modest home. Glancing at her medals and at Dan's framed photo, the journalist asked, "Who were you before the Air Force?" Ellie smiled. "Just a girl from Iowa. I joined to make my dad proud. I stayed because it gave me purpose. But Dan, he taught me that doing the right thing is rarely easy, but it's always worth it." The clip of her refusing Trump's handshake went viral not for outrage, but for impact. Headlines read, "Pilot refuses handshake delivers a truth that silences all." Leadership classes played the video. Even international networks aired it. Ellie received thousands of messages. One stood out. "My brother made the same choice. We thought no one would ever understand. Thank you." Dan was no longer forgotten. A week later, Trump returned to dedicate Daniel's plaque. "This plaque," he said, "is a reminder that strength isn't just force, it's moral courage." Ellie added, "Dan didn't die a coward. He died believing that truth would matter someday. Today, it does." As a bugler played taps, the tribute Dan never got was finally given. Shortly after, Ellie received a letter from the Department of Defense. Daniel Harris's dishonorable discharge had been reversed. Officially, she clutched the letter to her chest. "We did it, Dan!" At Arlington Cemetery, she knelt beside his stone. She placed a museum plaque beside it. "I never stopped fighting for you, and I never will." A young couple passed by. The man whispered, "That's the pilot from the video." But Ellie didn't notice. She stayed a while longer. This wasn't goodbye. It was a homecoming. Later, Ellie addressed cadets at the Air Force Academy. "Courage," she told them, "sometimes means asking questions. It means doing what's right even when it's hard." They gave her a standing ovation. A girl made a scrapbook of Dan's life for a school project. "Sometimes the bravest break rules for the right reasons," she wrote. Ellie smiled. "He still is a hero." From the president's office came another letter, a posthumous Bronze Star for Daniel Harris. At the ceremony, Maria Harris, Dan's mother, sobbed quietly. "Thank you for giving him back to the world." Ellie held her hand. "He gave himself. I just made sure people saw it." Veterans from the 1983 mission gathered. Old pilots signed a memorial book next to Dan's photo. "I owe him my life," one wrote. Ellie added, "He flew with me. He stood for truth. He never left my side." That night, they lit candles in his honor. She took one final flight in a vintage jet. The wind roared. Her heart raced. She whispered, "We made it, Dan." Above the clouds, two souls soared once again. Years later, children still visit the Hall of the Forgotten. Some become soldiers, some teachers. All leave knowing that true courage doesn't come from orders, it comes from conscience. And Ellie, now older, walks quietly among them. She watches as the truth she fought for lives on. In the photo beside the plaque, two young pilots smile. The world remembers now. And the handshake that never happened became the moment that changed everything.